Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no worries.
There you go. I got mic'd up.
Yeah, how do I sound on your end? I
Good.
think let me make sure it's actually using the mic, I suppose. Okay, yeah, it is.
Yeah, it sounds a lot better. Now we look like professional podcasters. Look at this.
Right.
Look at us. Here we go. All right. So I guess we can probably start sometime around now.
Okay.
Yeah, how have you been?
I've been good, and I've been busy. Been putting a lot more time into, my dissertation and school, which has kept me from doing a lot of other things. But overall, been good. How about you?
Been pretty good. I've also been busy. We have a lot of plans, and I really like to overcommit to stuff that I don't really have time for, but in my brain, I just think, yeah, I can do this. Why
I
not?
feel that.
And then before you know it, that's my whole day. That's what my whole day is,
Right.
just overcommitting to stuff. But it's been fun. I'm really trying to cut back over spring break. I'm trying to cut back on all the stuff. I'm like, I don't really need to be doing this,
hmm
you know.
Yeah.
But
No, I feel it. My stepsister is in college and she's got like, a million different jobs, million clubs and whatever. And I told her, it was like, I know you're not going to be happy setting your engagement level to here. So just be sure to go from up here to back down here every so often and just avoid that burnout because
yeah,
you're not satisfied doing so little and to avoid the burnout. So you just kind of got to oscillate between
yeah,
doing everything and a little bit of nothing.
that's true. Yeah, every once in a while you got to cut it out. Yeah, well,
hmm
I was really excited for spring break, which actually technically starts today. And I was like, oh, cool, spring break is great. And then three of my professors assigned work, and then I got a Zoom call to jump on, and I've got to, before you know it, I'm like, well, that's spring break's gone essentially.
Yep. Yep.
I'll have a
Always
few
something.
days at home, but
That'll be good
it's
at least.
it'll be nice. It'll be a nice recharge time. It's all
Yeah.
fun stuff that I have to do for the most part, so I'm not too worried about that.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a lot that we wanted to jump into today. It's been a while since we last spoke. You were supposed to be on the show, and then that episode ended up getting scrapped because Zoom decided it was going to kick us out every 40 minutes, which was awesome. But
Yeah.
there's been a lot going on. And I think the first thing I wanted to jump into was that there has been no easing into this. We're just jumping right in. There's been a lot of
Mhm.
political infighting on the right. I
Yeah.
think that's been happening a lot on the left too as well. But I think the one thing that I observed was that Trump had a way of getting rid of that infighting on the right. He really found a way to like pull everybody together. And yeah, there were people that didn't support him, but there wasn't ever that like active kind of clash.
hmm
And now we're seeing multiple instances of media institutions on the political right and our politicians actually kind of going at each other a little bit. And what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so first, I do agree that it's happening on the left too. I think it's been happening on the left and more clearly on the left, ever since kind of the progressive, non-progressive split.
Mm-hmm.
Probably before then too. I just wasn't paying as much attention before then. I don't know. I think it's probably a number of things. I think a big part of it is is that the kind of media onslaught of Trump didn't stop after he left office. And I think that kept going. And the types of stories that started coming out and the way that even conservative media sources started covering them felt different in a lot of instances. The one I'm thinking of in particular is when he had Kanye over for dinner. And then all of a sudden, like even Daily Wire, started framing it more. I don't want to say it was a hit piece or anything like that, but it was much more, it was less charitable an interpretation of that dinner than I would expect from a conservative source, right? I would expect kind of a more charitable interpretation of what Trump's motives were, what maybe Kanye's motives were, whatever. But the way that it was covered, it seemed to be more, negative. I don't know how much of that coincides with DeSantis. DeSantis has been super successful. He's very popular on a local level and has started gaining more popularity kind of across the country. And he has some Trump like characteristics, but he also differs from him in a lot of ways. And he's sort of become, in a lot of ways, the I don't know, conservative media darling on the right. And I think that's probably split people too, that because Trump, the diehard Trump supporters, they are Trump supporters, period. And so if now there's another candidate that comes in that has any amount of chance of, challenging that, that is going to spur some kind of dissent between those two groups. So I think those two things played into it, but obviously there's more to it than just media and just DeSantis coming up.
Yeah, I saw when I first saw that rivalry. I don't really know when it began, but I
Mhm.
first saw it. It was a couple days before the midterms, and Trump started going after DeSantis, and that seemed like a bad political strategy, not particularly effective. Like if you wanted to go after him after the midterms, I understand that because if Trump sees him as an opponent in the primaries that
Mhm.
actually has a potential chance of beating him, I would maybe understand that attack, but it was also
Mhm.
kind of lousy. I mean, like Ron DeSanctimonious, Trump's had better Trump's had better shots at people than
Yeah, it
that.
doesn't flow off the tongue nearly as well as some of his other nicknames. But
No.
to that effect, though, it is, whether it's a good or a bad strategy, it is a Trump strategy. He did that with all of his opponents in the previous primary round, and he had nicknames for everyone, whether it was Democrat or Republican, or in the Republican primaries, had something specific for everyone. And to his credit, that does have a certain appeal to it, in the sense that he's willing to point out things that other politicians sometimes aren't. A lot of times he goes too far or says things that are inappropriate too. But I'm not too surprised that he's going after DeSantis because of that. That's just kind of his style. And I think that it's only going to heat up once the debates start, once the primaries start. Nikki Haley announced her run. I'm sure that he's going to lay into her to a certain extent. I may be misremembering, but I think she had promised not to run against him at one point, and now is, or presumably will be, if she makes it far enough in the process. So I'm sure that the attacks will start coming for her too. And some of it may be justified, some of it may not be, but as far as the timing goes, I think that timing is probably not one of Trump's strong suits. There were
No.
issues in regards to, was it Georgia? I think it was Georgia, with like mail-in voting, where he talked uh, very negatively about it, and then Republican turnout was weaker than it needed to be to be successful in the local elections. I may be misremembering. It may not be Georgia, but you know, there are legitimate concerns that I and other people on the quote unquote right or other conservatives have, and I think that he made a lot of good points about those concerns. But yeah, the timing sometimes winds up having negative impacts. But I think honestly, that's a big part of this divide. If you look at even Daily Wire versus Steven Crowder, I think a lot of it boils down to very fundamental differences in approach, in their case to business, in this other case to politics, to where how how politically incorrect are you willing to be, or how willing to step away from kind of the standard, I don't know, way of doing things, I guess, because that is, DeSantis is a more quote unquote clean cut candidate than Trump, and he is a little more restrained when it comes to his handling of the media or of other things. Whereas some people like that attack dog quality of Trump, and it's a big motivator, and some people don't. um, so I don't know. I think that's started to manifest more recently.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a difference in approach is a big thing.
Mhm.
The one thing I've sort of admired about DeSantis is that every time someone brings up the beef with Trump, he just goes back
Mhm.
to, well, this is me and this is what I'm doing. And he's almost have an attitude of like, I don't have time for that lunatic. Like, I don't have time for him. I'm out here doing my own thing, which I like. He's in a way, he's kind of ignoring Trump, which I think is a
Mhm.
better strategy. But yeah, I would also agree that Trump's attack dog strategy was kind of fun. It was
Yeah.
like the way he would he didn't play the game. The media would bring up dishonest questions, and he just wasn't willing to go along with it. And that part was kind of fun. And the way that he tore up Bush in the primary in 2016, like that,
Low
because that was
energy Jeb.
it was new, like, low energy
Yeah.
Jeb, but it was
I,
fun, and
right.
it was new. And I now I think in hindsight, me personally, I think that it's done more harm than good for our discourse as a country. But yeah, I mean, I think people still like that. And in a way, I still kind of like that, but um, I'm definitely not a Trump fan. I think when it's paired with a personality like that, it's not as productive. Again, it's not productive for discourse or really for our politics. But yeah, I would agree with you. The Daily Wire situation with Steven Crowder is really strange because I tried to look into the contract because
Mhm.
the Daily Wire put out a video where the CEO read the contract and everything that was in it,
Right.
and like they were offering him obviously, like, what was it, $30 million a year? Like, that's a lot of money for 4 years. Um,
Yeah, yeah, but
but
it
then
also included all other production costs
right,
and,
and that
employee
was
salaries and everything. So 30 million would have been shrunk down to, whatever it would be post cost. But yes, it is still a lot of money for sure.
yeah, yeah. So that was the part that was interesting, is that they threw in that he was going to be producing his own show and paying for all of that at
Hmm.
the current level of production that it
Right.
was. And that is understandably frustrating for Crowder, I would imagine, because if he, and I don't know what he was making before. I'm assuming
Hmm.
it was a decent chunk of money, but I don't know the exact number. And now
Yeah.
he's being offered this big chunk, but oh wait, it's being knocked down. Now I don't know what they've offered their other people. Like, I don't know how much money they gave Brett Cooper, Jordan Peterson, Matt Walsh. Like, I don't know what their other contracts have looked like,
Hmm.
but yeah, and then it just seems like they're just going at each other's throats. And Ben Shapiro put out a video where he was like, "Oh, the disgusting betrayal of Steven Crowder," and
Yeah.
I don't really know if it was a disgusting betrayal. From what
Hmm.
I've seen, it seems like a misunderstanding in business, and
Well, I think the main thing, like I said earlier, I think it's just a fundamental disagreement in how to run a business and business model. And Crowder has talked about this too. I would definitely check out, if you or any of your viewers are more interested, check out him on Tim Pool's show. He kind of goes into more detail on it and everything, and his side of things, which admittedly is still just one side of it. But I think with Daily Wire, the main problem he had with that contract or term sheet, since technically I suppose it wasn't a contract yet, it was going to be a contract. But the main problem with the term sheet was that if he was given a strike or deplatformed or lost monetization on, say, YouTube or any other platform, they listed a handful of them, he would lose a certain percentage of that fee of the total amount of money that he was getting, right? Which Crowder has been banned from YouTube numerous times, right? So that's almost a given that it's going to happen if his show and content remain the way that they are.
which is
And a
what they
big,
wanted.
right, yeah, presumably, right. And so, if you set that groundwork, you are, and this is where I somewhat agree with Crowder to an extent, is that you are bending to YouTube and other big tech platforms to an extent, because you're not willing to say, well, if my network member gets removed from your platform, I'm perfectly fine with it because I like the content they're giving. You're setting this expectation that you will abide by the rules and guidelines of YouTube, even if they preferentially deplatform or preferentially demonetize conservatives or whatever else. Um, and so if Carter wants to salvage that fee, he would have to substantially change his show and how he talks and what he talks about. Um, I don't know, with the Ben Shapiro video, I agree with some of what he said. I don't really like the idea of secretly recording someone, without their knowledge to hold as ammunition in case you may need it, if you are presumably friends with the person. I don't know Crowder or Jeremy Boring personally, obviously, so I don't know their relationship or their dynamic besides what they say. So maybe it was more innocuous than that is framing it. But you know, at the same time, I think that it's that kind of, like I said, kind of standard way of doing things of like, as a business, you are going to pursue greater profits and then you're going to protect those profits. And so if part of your business gets taken off of YouTube, you lose YouTube revenue, right? So
Mhm.
that's technically in a certain logic, a bad thing. But if you adopt a different model like Crowder's and like he's talked about, then you may set up other revenue streams. You may, preferentially post content to other platforms like Rumble or whatever else. And you can kind of get around it. You probably can't get, in theory, I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like you can't get quite as big, right? If you don't uh, adhere to those other platforms and things, because your reach is smaller, your audience is then necessarily smaller. So I get the business side of what Daily Wire is saying, and I get the principles side of what Crowder is saying. And I think that, again, with the Trump versus DeSantis thing, DeSantis to a lot of people seems like a very safe and particularly media safe option, and people don't like that. Whereas Trump is very much not a safe option, but seems to a lot of people more principled and more, pushing in a particular direction because that's what he believes and not because it's what the media allows or what the Republican Party wants, or et cetera. You could insert any number of motives.
Yeah, I still I don't know. I feel like DeSantis is still, from the conservative perspective, he's still like principle driven.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I honestly I think if I was a conservative, I would probably be voting for DeSantis in that case over Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because I wouldn't want I want younger candidates. I want younger politicians. I
Sure.
don't want the old people being in DC for 50 years anymore. But
Right.
Trump did have a way of really pulling in that audience. I mean, I think he still has a decent amount of that base
Mm-hmm.
by the neck.
Yeah.
But so there's also been talk of him running third party. I haven't really heard if that's something that's actually going to happen. I can't see it because if Trump is wanting to win,
Mm-hmm.
he probably isn't going to do that.
Yeah, I can't really see that. I feel like I mean, obviously it's a possibility. But I think that if he were to run third party, he would probably be the most successful third party candidate historically. Whether that means he wins, that's a different question. I think it could open up the possibility to third parties being more successful in the future. But I don't think he needs to do that. I think that, I heard someone, and I can't credit them because I can't remember where this came from, so apologies. But someone was saying how every candidate besides DeSantis who runs is going to more than likely pull from the DeSantis vote than from the Trump vote. Because again, Trump voters, like, you're going to be a Trump voter, period. Like, you're
Mm.
not, at least a large proportion of them, maybe not all of them, right? But whereas a DeSantis voter is, I think, more likely to be swayed and say, well, actually, I like what Nikki Haley is saying. I like what Pompeo is saying. I like what Pence is saying. So I'm going to vote for one of them, and kind of shift into that voter group. And then it's just going to split that vote up, and then Trump will be successful, and we've already heard of numerous people who have at least announced desires to run. They haven't officially announced their candidacy, um, but I don't think he would need
DeSantis
to go to a third party.
DeSantis hasn't officially announced yet, has he?
No, I don't think so. I think Nikki Haley, to my knowledge, I think Nikki Haley is the only other person. But I think obviously
Okay.
DeSantis, people are thinking about Pompeo, I think has expressed interest in it. I heard John Bolton did, but I can't imagine him being super successful outside of, maybe the more, I don't know, interventionist conservative voter base. And like, who else? There were a couple other people whose names, Mike Pence, his name got tossed around a little as potentially wanting to run, but no one else, to my knowledge, has officially declared that they're going to.
Yeah, I feel like DeSantis at this point has to announce something. It's the
Mm-hmm.
whole like you don't want to miss your moment thing. I think this
Yeah.
is probably his moment to go run for president, I would imagine. Do you think there's ever a situation in which Trump and DeSantis squash the beef and one of them hops on the VP ticket with the other?
Maybe that was what I was thinking early on, kind of before Trump started going in on DeSantis. That's sort of what I thought would be their best plan of attack. But I do wonder how it would impact people's perception of Trump and whether or not because again, he's not. That's sort of playing the game, right? That's sort of you take the second most popular candidate or whoever, despite potentially substantial differences in policy or beliefs or whatever, you make them your VP, and then kind of pool your voter bases, or you take one of the least popular like Kamala Harris and make hers, and kind of take
Or
that
Trump,
approach.
or Trump takes Candace Owens as his VP.
Right. Yeah, I had kind of thought that Nikki Haley would be a good either Trump or DeSantis VP, because it would kind of hit on a lot of the left's identity politics points. Even though that shouldn't be the focus, it would at least cover them so that you could preempt baseless attacks of racism or sexism or whatever. But she's also probably, I don't know too much about her policies or her politics from her announcement video. I don't have any serious qualms with her as of yet, but I guess we'll have to see later. But no, I mean, apparently she's, and that doesn't mean that it won't change later. Same thing with Biden Harris, right? They were both candidates, and then Harris wasn't, and Harris was the VP. So it could still happen later on. And maybe during the debates, it turns out that Trump and DeSantis are more on the same page than the sort of feud makes it seem to be. And I also wonder how much of that feud is kind of just stirred up by the media, and blown out of proportion. Because yeah, Trump has had his comments, but that's
Yeah,
sort of the extent of it so far.
that's the confusing part, because to me, and this is someone, I'm not a conservative. I don't really keep up with politicians in general. I'm not really super sure about a lot of, like, for example, Nikki Haley's campaign. I'm not super
Mm-hmm.
familiar at all, but Trump and DeSantis don't really seem like they're that opposed on that much stuff. Like, what are they really disagreeing on that's actually starting a feud?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it, and so I don't know as much of it either. Like I said, I've been too buried in work to really pay attention to too much of anything. But I think part of it is personality. Part of it, I've heard discussions about the COVID vaccine, right? Because Trump did it while he was in office, he did help spur Operation Warp Speed. He spurred the kind of I don't know development of, and then encouragement of taking the vaccine, at least at first, whereas DeSantis has kind of taken the opposite approach, at least more recently. Florida is looking into VAERS reports of post-vaccine injuries and things like that, and I believe he didn't mandate it in Florida. I don't know. So stuff like that has been discussed, of different approaches on the COVID vaccine, as that's gotten more controversial. Outside of that, like, I'm sure there are a million things that I'm just not thinking of, but yeah, they do seem more similar than dissimilar, which is sort of, as someone who is not a diehard Trump supporter, I would vote for either of them over Biden. I would vote for either of them over Harris. I would probably vote for either of them over any Democratic candidate that has been tossed around or postulated as being a potential candidate. They've tossed around Newsom, I think, is one other guy that they may run. So I mean, out of any of them, right? I don't care if it's Trump or DeSantis, and I
If
think
they
they're
want to
close enough for
lose,
me. Yeah, right.
if they want to lose, they'll put up Newsom. I mean,
Right.
maybe that's an uneducated take,
Yeah.
and it probably is, but he just seems like he's. I mean, how many people are really over there love in California?
Right.
I mean, he even had like all the comedians who, for the majority of all the comedians are like pretty liberal, but even all of them, like they all fled, like they all went
Mm-hmm.
to Austin. Like that was also kind of because Rogan went and they all followed Rogan, but
Yeah.
a lot of them were saying like it's just like there was this ridiculous stuff going on over there. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Maybe if the
Yeah.
Democrats want to lose, if they want to
Right.
lose, they have a plethora of options, in my opinion.
Sure.
It's the question whether or not they want to win.
Right.
And if they want to win, I still don't know who they're going to put up.
Well, it's like, I mean, if you compare Newsom and DeSantis, I think is a great comparison, because if you look at the policies in Florida and California, look, obviously I'm biased and I'm more conservative, right? But I think that I'd like to believe that if you had to extract those policies and then apply that approach to a national level, I'd like to believe more people would side with DeSantis's, right? It's more in general, more pro freedom. It's more, kind of particularly in regard to COVID and the lockdowns and the kind of mandates and things that happened. But yeah, I mean, even aside from COVID and stuff, Rogan left, like you said, Shapiro left. Didn't
Hmm.
Musk left, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I think a lot of that is due to tax policies and things. A lot of it is also like I just got back from San Diego for a conference, and parts of San Diego are gorgeous. Parts of San Diego are beautiful, along the water and, beautiful. Other parts, they're just it, it, there's, trash and homeless people everywhere, and there's just these. It sort of gives the feeling of just a community that has fallen to a combination of bad policy and degeneracy and laziness, and I'm not saying that that's to blame for every single one of San Diego's woes, but it's a stark difference in policy, and when you see those sorts of policies in regard to whether it's drug legalization or allowing setting up lodging on public property and things like that. You see tent cities, you see, over an abundance of drug use and things like that. And I don't think most people want that to be nationwide, and I don't think Newsom would be able to do that nationwide, but it reflects at least somewhat on him, just like Florida reflects somewhat on DeSantis. And Florida has been, killing it and with COVID and with various other things. So yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see who they run and how successful they are, if at all.
Yeah, I do think it does reflect. I mean, yeah, the performance of the state. I think even whether it's, and when I say that, I mean like an individual state, like the
Mhm.
reflect, like the performance of Florida, whether or not any of the actual factors are DeSantis's fault, does
Right.
reflect on DeSantis. Like, and that goes for any governor in the state. Like, whether or not
Mhm.
the president is actually to blame for any of the stuff that happens,
Mhm.
you blame it on the president. That's just what we always
Right.
do.
The buck stops with you. Right.
Yeah, I mean, is the economy doing bad because of Biden? I don't know. Is the economy just doing like an oscillation that it's always done? I don't know, because I feel like every time there's a president that walks in and it's like, oh, the economy's terrible. Well, then the economy just it kind of like bounces back again. And whether that's because I don't know if that's because of policy or anything. I don't know, but it just feels like some of that stuff is outside of the president's control, but we're gonna
Yeah.
blame it on them anyway.
Yeah, I think it's always probably a mixture, and then certain presidents it's probably more their fault, certain pres or governors or whoever, it's probably more their fault, and certain ones it's probably less. But ultimately, part of it comes down to just owning the responsibility inherent in your position. Like I've seen a couple interviews with Biden where they'll ask him whether he takes responsibility for inflation or responsibility for gas prices or whatever it may be. And regardless of whether he is to blame for those things, his responses of, no, no, absolutely not. It was here when I moved in, or this was due to my predecessor, or this, it just feels very deflective and weak to a certain extent, to where I would rather have a response of, look, there's a number of factors involved, and I can't say that it's entirely on me or entirely not on me, but I'm doing everything I can to fix it, yada yada. There's a better way to handle it than just completely avoiding all responsibility, even if it isn't your responsibility technically. Because you are the president, right? Or you are the governor, and you are tasked with leading. And so there's something to be said about being a leader and taking on responsibility, even in cases where you may not technically have to.
So you'd prefer a solutions approach to those accusations, even if it's not entirely at the fault of Biden. You'd rather say, like, I understand that's a problem. Here's what we're doing to fix it.
I, in general, yes. In general, yes. I think it would depend on how the question is framed, how it's presented, right? Because there are dirty questions that are slung with no no real base. And the media does that in a lot of ways. They did do it to Trump and DeSantis a lot, and there are ways, but that's, DeSantis had an instance, I think it was vaccine distribution to Publix. Yeah, Publix. It was like a grocery store chain down in
Yeah.
Florida. And he got a bunch of backlash because people thought it was corruption. People thought it was, well, Publix is giving you money, so you give them the vaccine to distribute and then win-win. And he had an interview with a reporter where the reporter started bringing this up. He went back and defended himself, pointed out, explained to them the situation and what they were missing and how they were mischaracterizing everything, and then presented them with that, and then to an effect called them fake news, right? Whereas I think Trump would just jump to, no, that's nonsense, you're fake news, whatever. I think both of those are to an extent appropriate because it is an unfair question or an unfair premise in a lot of cases. But I think that sort of explanatory solutions-based approach that DeSantis took in that instance that I can't really see Trump taking if he had been put in that same type of situation. I think it kind of is right in between pointing out the flaws in the media and pointing out the flaws in the question and the corrupt, whether it's whatever, and bending to the media, because you also don't want to just say, oh yes, I'm very sorry, I didn't really think about how people would consider this only going to Publix first, or whatever, because it isn't true. He had it in various other places, and he had worked with other pharmacies and whatnot, and so you don't want to just say, yeah, you're right, when you're not. But if you just say, well, you're fake news, then you haven't presented your case either, right? So as in terms of Biden, I think if he truly thinks that he's not responsible, then I think it's okay for him to say that if he's being truthful, but then also like give more than just it's Trump's fault. Give more like, okay, well then why haven't you changed things since Trump was gone? Or what have you done to mitigate what you believe was Trump's fault? Or give something. It just feels very, not my fault, orange man bad. And that's kind of it.
Yeah, I have seen a couple instances of that, and I wonder how long it'll take for that to go away.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it should have stopped a while ago. I mean, sure,
Mm-hmm.
you could certainly accredit blame to Trump for XYZ thing. Sure, you could make the argument. But I feel like at a certain point, yeah, you have to. Yeah, I agree, and like that's a good point. Trump wasn't good at presenting his case. He would just be like,
Right.
fake, it's fake, or whatever.
And that's what people want to a certain extent, right? Because like I think a lot of people were fed up with the questions even being asked. Like that, the question that is solely intended to attack and mudsling with no real basis in reality, or very, very little basis in reality, that's just slung out as a, hey, I want my sound bit and I want to show that that you're incapable. Can you answer this question? I think a lot of people do just want, someone to give them the middle finger and say no. So I think it's, my hope earlier on was that Trump had walked so that someone like DeSantis could run. And so that it kind of just, have Trump kick the door in and expose these issues with media, with, politicians and corruption in the quote unquote swamp and all of these things, and have that more brash and unrefined approach, and then lead the way for people like DeSantis, or lead the way for people like Youngkin and other people like them who are a bit more refined and are a bit more, they're willing to play the game a little bit, but they're still, they still have Trump-like policies, or they still have Trump-like attitudes in certain ways, and focus on issues that Trump had kind of brought to the forefront. So there is value in Trump's approach too. I don't want to say that that it's not valuable, or that I completely dislike it either. And like you said earlier, it is fun. It is fun to hear CNN drop a horrible question that is only intent on slandering or mudslinging, and him to just say, you're just slandering and mudslinging, get out of here, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there was something, and I think like I think in general Americans sort of realized, maybe a little bit less in the conservative circles, but I think that at first Trump was just this kind of rogue, like he was this wild card guy that walked in, like you said, didn't play the game,
Mhm.
said like he would break the fourth wall that politicians can never break. Like when that interviewer was like, "Oh, Putin kills a lot of people in Russia," and Trump goes, "I would kill a lot of people here too."
Mhm.
That is something that no politician would say in that situation, and we all know it.
Yeah.
Like we all know what time it is. Everyone's got an iPhone. Everyone can see. Like we all know that the United States probably kills a lot of people too. But
Mhm.
again, it was refreshing to hear someone say it like that.
Yeah.
And it was fun. I think for a while it was fun. And I think now I would still give him a little hee hee ha ha whenever he would say something funny. But I think in my position, especially with being in the bridge building space, I've now realized that it's not particularly helpful. And I think a lot of people have kind of woke up to that idea that this isn't, we kind of let it go on too far, too long. And in a way, I do think Trump did accelerate polarization in some ways. I think the left has done their fair share of that as well. I think everyone has contributed to that. But I think
Mhm.
that has gone on unchecked for a little bit too long. But in the beginning, it was fun.
I
It
don't
was
know. I
fun in the
think
beginning.
I think that so I kind of feel differently in the sense that I think I missed it, and now that he's kind of back, I do more so appreciate that take again. And I wouldn't say, he does have his bridge building abilities too, right? You can look at things like the peace deals in the Middle East that he was able to pull off, and whether good, bad, or indifferent, his handling of people like Putin and Kim Jong Un and being able to open dialogue in certain ways that other leaders haven't been able to. So I think there's certain elements to Trump that can lend themselves to bridge building. I think the alternative and part of what makes me miss him in that kind of brash approach is, the alternative was Joe Biden running on unity and then getting into office and calling political opponents, a variety of names and just fomenting dissent and division, calling out the unvaccinated and saying that they're causing the pandemic and at certain instances. None of this is verbatim, obviously, but I think that he sowed a lot of division under the guise of trying to sow unity. And I think that pisses people off even more, because I think if you're somewhat naturally divisive but you kind of just own it and you bring it to the table, and for better or worse you are who you are, at least then you're being real to a certain degree, as opposed to saying, look, I'm here to unite everyone, and then suddenly kicking down half of the country by, calling MAGA Republicans extremists, or blaming the unvaccinated for various elements of the pandemic and everything else. So I think that we saw a flip back to almost entirely playing the game and entirely, saying one thing and doing another, or putting on a politically correct face, and then passing policies that fly in the face of it. So I don't know. I do sort of miss that approach of Trump, and I think that's part of what people fear, whether justifiably or not, about DeSantis, is that he is getting more positive media coverage, particularly on the right, and whatever. And I think people fear that he is sort of that too good to be true candidate, and that he's going to get in and then kind of do an about face, similar to, probably
Mm,
not to the extent of, but similar to how someone like Biden has. And I think that's the worry with any kind of clean cut and presentable politician, is that you worry that they're going to be a politician.
right. So you were not a fan of Dark Brandon detecting
No,
malarkey
no,
and
yeah,
shooting the laser eyes. Is that's
the
my
memes
new
were good.
favorite. That's my new favorite Biden meme. It was the "Let's Go
Yeah.
Brandon" one because that was just so corny and it was so ridiculous, and I can't believe that it was even real. And that was really funny. And then there was
Mm-hmm.
like the no malarkey thing, and they put that on the T-shirt with
Mm-hmm.
the Joe Biden the doing like the it's like the Joe Biden with like the laser eyes shooting out onto the whatever it was. Like,
Right.
I thought that one was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in some ways, yeah, I haven't been a huge fan. To be fair, I wasn't really a fan of Trump's rhetoric in
Sure.
that more bridge building space either. But Biden has definitely put out some rhetoric that I don't think has been particularly helpful.
Mhm.
Um, People are allowed to view MAGA Republicans as a threat to democracy. You're allowed to say that, and you're allowed to
Sure.
hold that viewpoint. I have no problem with people holding that viewpoint. I think the way from more of a liberal perspective, if you think that the MAGA Republicans are a threat to democracy, I do not believe that the first move should be to call them extremists who are a threat to democracy. Also,
Sure.
on the right, I don't think it's a good move to call the liberal people, oh, the radical socialists, radical this and that. I also don't think that's a good play because, first of all,
Mhm.
I know plenty of liberals who are not radical socialists. I know
Right.
liberals who are in favor of capitalism.
Mhm.
So I don't think that's a fair play either. And I don't think that's a way to bring people, not that I want to make more centrist. That's never been
Mhm.
something I wanted to do, but just to kind of bring people more to a place of understanding. I don't think that that's the right way to do it either.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it ultimately it comes down to, do you really believe, like, I think that if you are a politician, if you're in Congress, if you're, whoever, and you believe that a particular ideology is incredibly damaging to the country, and you see an instance of something and you genuinely believe that it falls with under the umbrella of that ideology, then I think it is your responsibility to point that out, to criticize it, to, whatever, because, well, you're there guiding government, you're there guiding policy and guiding law. And so if you don't do that, right, all it takes for evil to flourish is good men to do nothing, or, all the sayings,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think you should point it out. But I think that it probably does get overused, right? Same with like uh, Marxism on the right is another kind of buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think there are genuine instances probably on both sides, right? I'm biased and I see the instances of the right calling out the left and thinking that they're genuine. I'm sure that there are instances on the left too. I just don't watch those news sources as much.
Mm-hmm.
So there are genuine instances, right? There are policy proposals or legislation proposals that I would consider to be under the umbrella of one ideology or another that may be damaging. And so I think it's appropriate to call it out in those contexts. But at the same time, I think it's important to be, well, principled, right? And if you don't truly believe it, that's what people are getting fed up with, is politicians just either not holding true to their promises or flip-flopping based on either what voters say they want or whatever, but not adhering to a strict set of principles in how they handle these things.
Yeah, I think I would generally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, if you genuinely think, I think that is the problem. I think all of these buzzwords that get thrown, I think they're all
Mm-hmm.
just overused. Like to
Right.
me, racism doesn't mean anything anymore because it's
Yeah.
been thrown around so much. In a way, Marxism doesn't mean anything anymore because that's been thrown around so much. I think we've just taken the meanings of these words
Mm-hmm.
that have genuine meaning that we need to keep a hold of, and we've just, in a way, we've thrown them to the wayside because we like to call anybody that
Mm-hmm.
isn't on the side that we identify with, we like to label them as a certain thing.
And then the problem is the
Um,
boy who cries wolf, right? Because then a Marxist rises up and the right calls him a Marxist and they say, you're crazy. You're just going for sound bites, or you're just going for whatever. And no one takes it seriously because you've said Marxist a million times. And now you
mhm.
have Marxism actually able to infiltrate the policy or legislative decisions because, well, that can't be Marxism. You say Marxism a million times, this one isn't going to be the real one. Again, same thing on the left, I'm sure, but
Yeah, if there's
like,
actually there's actually someone who's genuinely racist and hateful, at
right.
this point they could sneak right through because those
Mm-hmm.
events, yeah, I mean, either one of those is possible. Yeah.
Right.
I wonder, do you think that um so I was sort of feeling that obviously you can lay out 20 reasons as to why Trump was elected. You could lay out so many. I
Mm-hmm.
think one of them was that he was willing to call bullshit, sometimes not his own, but he was still willing to do it, which is more than what a lot of politicians were willing to do.
Mhm.
And I think people like that sort of approach. And I think that there was perhaps an opportunity for politicians to adopt some of his like approach
Mhm.
that they could then blend with perhaps a less divisive platform
Yeah.
that would become really popular. But I think what's actually happened is the politicians have just doubled down in their ways. Now they're just doing whatever pissed people off. They're just doing it more. I think on both sides, I think everyone's doing it more.
Mhm.
So in a way, I feel like it's entirely possible that Trump could just walk in again in 2024 because
Yeah.
none of the stuff that he called out in the beginning, which there are stuff that he called out that I think genuinely was happening. I do think
Mhm.
that the more mainstream media, I think they have been lying to us. They are still currently lying to us. They are still bringing up these bad faith questions to politicians. I think that politicians are genuinely not representing their bases anymore. I think that there are politics like the whole like drain the swamp thing. Like yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it got a
It's
bit of like
catchy, right?
it's catchy and
But
also
it
I think it got a bit of a bad thing attached to it because Trump said it. But genuinely,
sure.
I
Yeah.
do believe in the revolving door of DC. I also
Mhm.
do happen to believe in the idea of some sort of like a deep state.
Yeah.
I don't think that there
Yeah.
are actual like these shadowy cabals of people that get together in these rooms. I don't think it needs to be that. I think, for example, the people in the intelligence agencies,
Mhm.
those are not elected officials that have a lot of power that are
Mhm.
in DC that can influence the decisions that a president makes while they are in office. And I think plenty of those people exist. And I think the idea that now, could Trump actually remove any of those people? I don't think so, which is why it never actually happened. So I think in a way that was like a little bit of a false pretense, but if that's the right word, but like making that, exposing that, making it known was something that I think people wanted. And I think that none of that stuff has actually been integrated. None of it is actually happening. And I think that is potentially why someone like Trump could win again in 24.
I think yes and no. I think some people want it. I think other people have become very comfortable in their delusional perception of how the country is run or what is being done. And a lot of people don't like being tricked, right? Like,
Mm.
you have Musk buying Twitter and then releasing the Twitter files and showing concrete evidence of all of this, exactly this, right? FBI getting involved in Twitter and DHS getting involved in Twitter, and these agencies colluding with big tech. Zuckerberg went on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about how the FBI approached him about Russian disinformation before the election and how it led to stifling of the Hunter Biden laptop story. People, it's being presented to people, and it still gets kind of like disregarded as nonsense or conspiracy theory or even worse as justified, right? As people believing that no, that's what these institutions are for. um and I think a lot of it has been uh evidenced for a long time, right? You could Google Operation Mockingbird and see how, yeah, the CIA has been involved in trying to spread propaganda through media sources, right? And they've declassified the fact that they did it, and you can look into various CIA or FBI ops and see that, yeah, they have done a lot of bad, and they've interfered in a lot of ways that they shouldn't be. They've taken advantage of their unelected bureaucrat status. The NIH and Fauci with all of the controversy around COVID too. Again, even after emails get released, even after institutions have to backtrack on various statements or whatever, like there is still sort of this avoidance, either avoidance of the information and people don't look into it at all, even if they hear that it exists, or they hear it, they see it, and then they either just don't believe it, or the cognitive dissonance that they are set in their understanding of how the government is working, that they are not being tricked and lied to constantly, because that's hard to admit. It's hard to
Mm.
admit that every source of information you've taken in for probably your whole life has been at least tinged with lies, from the media.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to admit that, right? Or hard to admit that you took a vaccine that came out that now new problems with have been discovered, right? Or whatever it may be. So I think some people want that and want that exposed, and other people I think are too comfortable, or too just, they're in quote unquote the matrix, so to speak.
Right.
And they're happy there. So I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, that is true. I do think, well, I know that in certain instances I am one of those people. Like
Mhm.
I don't need to know. I don't want to know.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I do. It just depends on the situation and the context, I suppose.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just, that's kind of the one thing that well, for me, I guess that's the one thing that I worry about. I guess for you, um, if you are a DeSantis or Trump fan, that wouldn't really be a worry. But I worry about, what the challenges, I would face in the bridge building space then,
Mhm.
if Trump or I mean DeSantis I think is a little different. I think, DeSantis doesn't have the January 6th type event that's been attached to his presidency or to his platform.
Yeah.
He has the whole thing with the college, or with the high school curriculum being banned, and uh the book bannings and such. I don't know if you have any thoughts on stuff like that, but
Mhm.
I think that he doesn't really have that same stuff attached, so people wouldn't really feel the same type of way about him that they would Trump.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I think part of it, again, I think it depends on which voter you ask, right? Because I think if you were to, eh, like, for me, the January 6th incident doesn't have any bearing on whether I would vote for Trump or not, because I don't think that he incited it. I think that it was blown out of proportion by the media, and, potentially at least somewhat instigated by FBI or other agencies, not necessarily entirely, but I think that, again, it was kind of blown up to be this sort of anti-Trump ammunition, particularly to kind of keep that news cycle going even after Trump's out of office. Again, not to say it's all bullshit and that no one was genuinely there trying to cause a scene or cause damage or whatever, because of course you're going to have some genuine bad actors that get involved in stuff like that too. Um, but I think that, attaching that sort of stuff to Trump has led to DeSantis and others rising up, not just January 6th, but all sorts of stuff. Um, but then it always seems to turn out that it's not what it seemed, right? Like the protests at Lafayette Square was a good example of where every media source was beating it as the evidence that Trump was a fascist, and then it turned out that he wasn't the one that made the call to go and disperse the protesters, right? It was someone else that he didn't do that, right? Yes, he went there for the photo op, and you can weigh whether that was appropriate or not, and whatnot, but ultimately it was blown up to be something that it wasn't. And I think that people see that, and people see that DeSantis is rising up in part because of that, and in part distrust DeSantis because of it, right? Because again, it seems very much like, not saying it is, but it seems more like a setup. It seems like a let's squash Trump and bring in an alternative candidate by tacking on all of these things to him. But again, it's not all that. Trump is also sort of, in certain instances, an unsavory character who has poor rhetoric and other things too, right? So he brings a lot of it on himself too.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and I mean, in terms of the policies with DeSantis, I think that you see the similar impact where things are kind of made out to be something that they aren't necessarily, right? That they don't say gay bill, the parental rights and education bill that he had passed that banned discussing sexual orientation and gender identity from like K through 3. It was framed as something that didn't allow LGBT individuals to discuss themselves, or to various other much more extreme limitations on speech, when really it pertained to classroom instruction, and it pertained to you know curriculum and things like that I think if it were framed in that way, you would still have people that disagreed with it for sure, but you would have a lot more people that would be amenable to the idea that well, yeah, maybe we'll wait until after third grade to start discussing these sorts of things. And so, it all seems to just be kind of media attacks that have the grain of truth that then blow out of proportion and get wildly inaccurate by the end of it. Even the use of the word, book banning, right? To me, taking a book out of a local elementary school, while it is still available in the public library, while it's still available to purchase on Amazon, while it's still available to have and keep and read to your child at home, doesn't constitute a ban. It
Hmm.
is removing it from one particular context in which it may be age inappropriate, but you can get that book, right? No one's going to kick your door down if you decide that I disagree with what the elementary school is saying. I'm going to go get this LGBT related book and read it to my kid at home. You could do that, right? And no one's going to stop you. Whereas on the other side, you do have places like Amazon removing books from their platform. And again, I won't say, I suppose for them in that context, they are maybe banning it from their platform. Not to say you can't get it anymore,
Hmm.
but they get much less outrage, right? And part of that's because it's the private sector, but the impact and the reach of it seems larger than just not being able to get it at your local elementary school.
Hmm. Yeah, to be honest, that's an interesting point. I still don't know if I would. So to be honest, I haven't looked into what books were banned. I haven't looked into like
Sure.
why. I haven't looked into it. This is just the stuff that I've heard, and I've heard it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I really would have a rebuttal to that or any sort
No,
of
that's fair.
pushback. The one thing that um I think is there's an interesting conversation to have is the AP uh African American history
Okay.
course curriculum, which I did actually look into reading.
Mm-hmm.
Um I'm not sure if I necessarily agreed with banning it, although when I did look into it, it did seem very ideologically bent.
Yeah.
It did seem very one-sided in a way. But with that being said, again, I still don't know if I would really agree with banning it whenever. No, I think the final situation there was that they did send it back to be reworked,
Mm,
and then it
okay.
will be brought to DeSantis. That's from what I understand. If that's wrong,
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know. I'm
somebody in the
not
comments that we don't have ever happening,
right.
correct me.
Yeah, I'm not. So I'm not familiar with that specific case, so I can't say. It is different, right? Because now you're at the
County by
AP high
county
school.
basis. Counties in Florida ban books and then they kind of like run it up the chain. In total, 176 books were removed from the classrooms.
Oh, so Gavin was looking up
Mhm.
the book situation, and
Sure.
apparently it's on a county by county basis
Okay.
of removing books from classrooms, and I guess was it 176?
So 176, yeah.
176 books total.
Mhm.
So I think that's a conversation to be
Yeah.
had. I would be interested in looking to the list of what like kind of books are
Mhm.
on that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I
and I
think
and I
it's
would honestly, I would be worried about that being an ideological thing as well. I would be worried about a certain perspective in those books
mhm.
being removed.
Yeah.
But so I think there's an interesting conversation to be had there.
Well, it
Um,
gets boiled down to be very black and white, right? And I think that, it's obviously different whether we're talking about elementary school, high school, or college level, right? And the kind of level of education, right? Because a kindergartner or a first grader, you're just dumping knowledge into their head, right? They're not critically engaging with what you're giving them. They're not forming their own opinions and reading into other sources and then deliberating with friends about what is right or what's wrong. They're just, my teacher said this today, that's now true to me, right? And I think so ideologically driven curricula at that level are probably more problematic than at the higher levels where you can critically engage with it and discuss it. And to a certain extent, that's the point of higher education, right? With college is to discuss these ideas, have them battle it out, so to speak, and have the better ideas win. Um, And I think it being on the county level, to me, it makes it more appropriate, because then it's more that particular region, that particular local area is now determining what they want, as opposed to, say, a nationwide or statewide, idea of what is best or what's right for everyone. And I was having a discussion with someone. So this was, I'll leave names out, but this was someone that was running for a local board of election or board of education position in Ann Arbor. And I was having a discussion with them about, or trying to have a discussion with them about this, because she had posted a video discussing how, none of this is acceptable. This is all, we will not ban books. We will leave this up to the teachers and so to determine what is going in there. And the point that I raised is that I think, we can all agree that a dictionary is appropriate to have on a school bookshelf. And I think we can all agree that a Playboy magazine is inappropriate. It's just a matter of where do we draw that line in the middle of what is appropriate and what is not. And it immediately, that it didn't go anywhere, because it immediately got framed as, oh, we're not talking about porn, we're talking about these books. And I'm like, I get it, but
Yeah,
to
that's not
certain people, they're farther on the inappropriate side than the appropriate side. So either black or white approach is probably not appropriate. There's going to be certain stuff that is not appropriate to have on that shelf. We just have to come to some level of consensus on where to draw that line. And I think allowing each separate region in the state to draw that line themselves is probably the best way of handling it, as opposed to just having DeSantis say, this is the line, period. Or even worse, Biden or someone in the presidency saying, this is the line for all of you, period. Because then you kind of impose your value system and ideology on everyone at that point.
Yeah, that's something I've been kind of curious about lately, is like I've heard, obviously I haven't been all around the country. I've been to a couple states. I've been out west once. I was out in Arizona and Nevada for about a week. And I've been down south a couple of times. And I'm just, and I've met people, like we recently went to the Bridge USA Summit. I met people from all over the place. I mean, we met some guys from Oregon State, and we also met, and then we were in Florida. And whenever I saw the guys from Oregon in Florida, I was like, yeah, they're never gonna live here. Like this is not the place for them. Like we're all from places with such different cultures, such different backgrounds. We grow up valuing different things. We believe different things. So in a way, should something like that be left up to the states? Maybe it should. And yeah, California's going to look at Florida and be like, that is the definition of hell to me, because look at all these books that they're banning. Right. And then Florida might look at California and say the same thing. But I think that's, and then even at a more local level, let it go county by county, because there's going to be red counties, there's going to be blue counties, there's going to be purple counties. So maybe that is something that needs to be looked into. That would be an interesting topic.
Well, and it raises a question that I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are, since you're kind of getting more involved in this bridge building space. At what level should we be focusing on bridge building, right? Like, should we be worried too much? Like, because should we try to bridge build at the upper levels, whether that's state or nationwide, or is a sort of live and let live, agree to disagree sort of approach that doesn't result in policy or legislative compromise acceptable, and the bridge building should happen more at a local level? Or do you think that we should have more, kind of policy, legislative compromise and bridge building even at those higher tiers or levels, I guess?
So I think there's a little bit of both. I think there is definitely okay, where do I start? So I think, well, for example, bridge building, we love agreeing to disagree. That's like, we're fully down with that idea. So I think with Bridge USA in particular, focusing on college campuses, with an organization like Braver Angels focusing on local church communities, yes, the local level is where bridge building is the most valuable, because it's connecting with people on a human level, realizing that your experiences are not that different from mine. We have some disagreements, but maybe we grew up liking the same things. We grew up doing XYZ, activities that may have been similar or maybe even the same. And we have these political disagreements, but I can listen to your perspectives. You can listen to mine. We can reach a greater understanding of where we're all coming from we can leave still disagreeing on everything that we walked in disagreeing on, but we can still be friends because I've met you as a human being. I know that you're not this hateful, evil person that you've been painted as. I think as you go up, it gets harder. And I think at the national level, a bridge building can be important. Like Bridge USA has actually orchestrated constructive conversations between Republican and Democrat Congress people who are willing to sit down and give and take a little bit on these issues to reach a compromise. I think that the the solution oriented politics pillar of Bridge USA is important because agreeing, finding a compromise on every issue is obviously going to be impossible. But I think really trying to highlight and focus on the areas that we can agree on is important in building those human connections. But I think you're right. Like at the local level, that's where it's the most valuable, and that's I think where the majority of the focus should go.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that you're right that the kind of civility and ability to meet each other as human beings and talk at every level is important. I think so one reason I brought it up, kind of getting back somewhat to the Trump DeSantis and kind of discussion of what's going on the right. Part of the reason I bring it up is I hear common criticisms of the Republican Party or the quote unquote right as just being like the left or Democratic Party in slow motion. Like that it is just a steady progression and that they're constantly playing defense, and as opposed to ever playing offense and pushing things back towards the right or pushing things back towards more conservative principles or whatever, and more so stalling or blocking things that then eventually will chip away and be put in place. And so I wonder, the reaction that I've seen to politicians taking a different approach and taking more of the offensive is that, sort of they get called a racist, or they get called a transphobe, or they get called a, whatever. And it's then very hard to, if that is the approach of one side, and I'm not saying that this is exclusive to the left either, again, I just have my biases. It's hard to then come and have a civil discussion with someone that is just immediately going to say, well, you're racist, sexist, transphobe, for even trying to push this idea into policy or into legislation. I'm going to have nothing to do with it, and no way I'm bending or compromising, even if it's not about compromising, even if it's just, well, let's have a discussion about it, let's talk about it. You hear the same phenomenon with right-leaning podcast hosts, or even left for that matter, with Tim Pool, of where they'll talk about, Shapiro will talk about how he'll invite left-leaning people on to be interviewed, and they'll refuse because they don't want to support his podcast, or they don't want to support his, racist or whatever views or whatnot. And then I think you wind up in this area where you sort of bifurcate the economy on every single level, to where if it's entirely unacceptable to even engage with those ideas, then, well, you do need to, get a different razor company, go get your chicken sandwich at a different place, right? Or you have to, right? Everything then devolves into this us versus them. And I don't know what the solution is. I'm not trying to come up with the solution, but I think at a certain point, people wind up saying, well, fuck you then, I'm voting for Trump, because he's going to say, no, I'm not going to take this, and I will stand for what I believe in, even if you're going to call me a racist or a sexist or a transphobe or whatever. And I don't know where the right compromise is, right? Because you don't want to just abandon all hope and civility, but you also, at a certain extent, there's this saying I've heard on the left of civility is the tool of the oppressor. And I see what that, I can understand what that means, in the sense that if two sides, one that believes in civility and one that does not believe in civility, come together for a civil discussion, it sort of lends itself to making the other side able to more forcefully push their ideology or views, because they don't believe in civility and the other side does. And so if your opponent is being civil, just run them down, just trample them, and it goes against their principles to do the same to you. So just run them down, right? And so I don't know. In that case, it's almost civility is the tool of the oppressor because the oppressor can take advantage of it. But I get the side of, well, we've tried civility and it didn't work. So, trying to push it as a solution is oppressive. I don't know.
So you're saying like, to a certain extent, we don't want to abandon the idea that we should be able to have these conversations, but at the same time, how could you platform XYZ person? How could you go on there? Like, there's that idea that we shouldn't even associate with these people that hold these ideas that we deem to be intolerable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's a genuine concern, and that's something that the bridge building community is looking for a solution for, and we're going to have to figure it out because at some point we have to stop that.
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of intolerable ideas personally, because let's say you hold an idea that I don't like and I deem it intolerable. Let's say for the sake, the fact that you're a Trump supporter is so morally reprehensible to me that I cannot engage with you. And not only that, but you can't actually come into my circle. You can't come into my world or the public square and voice your concerns as a Trump supporter because you support him.
Right.
There is, I guarantee you, there's maybe 1 in 100 times with 1 in 100 people where you would then change that perspective that you have so that you could come into the circle. No, you're just going to go to the other circle that validates you more, and that can lead people to genuinely dangerous places.
Right.
And
I had an ex that called me complicit in treason for voting for Trump, and we are no longer dating.
Right. I mean, like
it doesn't work.
Well, it doesn't. And I genuinely try. It's a weird balance that I strike because I don't like to view ideas. It's weird. It's like I don't want to say that I do want to say that there are dangerous ideas. I guess it's a whole thing of like, where do you draw the line? Because like I do believe there are some ideas that genuinely are dangerous. I do believe that there are other ideas that are just ones that are diametrically opposed to mine, or I really disagree with them, but they're not particularly dangerous. I do think that the ideas that are genuinely dangerous, they really start to come out into the real world whenever there is then an echo chamber of people that hold those ideas.
Right.
Like if all of those people were separate, I think that's kind of what it was before the internet. Like I'm sure there were people that had crazy dangerous ideas, but then the internet gave all those people a place to be in one chat room, and then they could voice all of those concerns. And before you know it, that turns into some real world action. So I really don't like the idea of making ideas intolerable and then shunning them from the discourse because well,
even the internet, I don't even think the internet, I mean, maybe the internet exacerbated it, but even the internet, right? If you've got racist ideologies or whatever, someone posts a swastika on Facebook, right? Just as an example. Now, suddenly, you have this, maybe now they have greater reach. They're able to reach other neo-Nazis or other people who, whatever. But what then winds up happening is instead of the ideas being countered, whether in debate or civil discourse or, whatever it may be, or by people, choosing voluntarily not to associate with people, they get suppressed. And then now all of a sudden, all the Nazis have been banned from Facebook and they all go to 4chan. Right. Or they all go right now. You've collected everyone and formed the echo chamber through suppressing the ideas. You've ostracized people to the point where they only have so many options for where to go, and they all go there. And then, now you've increased the odds that they're able to communicate with each other and become more radicalized in their ideology because they're unable to discuss it with people who disagree with them. Because if someone they know says, no, you're wrong and this is why, as long as that's handled appropriately, right, as opposed to saying you're complicit in treason or your ideology is entirely unacceptable and I'm going to cancel you for it, if there's some sort of genuine dialogue there, I think that there is a chance of changing people's minds, right? Daryl Davis is a good example of he's the interacted with KKK members and changed a lot of minds. And, that's something that a lot of people wouldn't even see as possible and would be very quick to just say, no, you're just not allowed to have a case.
Oh, shit. It froze, Gavin. Zach froze.
Would've
Zach,
been
can you hear
said.
me?
Oh, yeah, I
Oh,
can.
you
Sorry, did
cut
we
out
cut
there
out?
for like, yeah, you cut out for like 5 seconds.
Gotcha. Sorry.
Oh, my internet connection is unstable. Oh, geez.
Oh no.
Well, there haven't been problems until now, so
Yeah,
let's just carry on. Yeah,
but
think that's true.
yeah.
I mean, and I think Daryl Davis, I think he is a perfect example of meeting somebody at a human level, and that
Mhm.
is what can change their mind. I really do believe that.
Right.
And I think that's, I think that is like a really important thing. And yeah, and that's why I'm really against that idea of making those ideas unfit for the public discourse. Because first of all, I want to know
Right.
where those people are.
Right.
I want to know who's holding those ideas. I want to know where they are. And then I want to know, okay, is there a possibility? Now I understand that I'm in a unique position. I think it would be ignorant for me to ask everybody to be in the same position with bridge building as I am.
Mhm.
Because to be honest, I don't really have a part of my identity that people are really going to attack. Like someone's going to call me a straight white man. That's the worst that it's going to be.
Sure.
And like, okay, fine. I can deal with that. But I don't really have any other part of my identity that people can really go after in a hateful way.
Mhm.
So I am in more of a position to sit down with some of those people that hold those ideas that we deem to be very dangerous, try to meet them on a human level and see if there is any room for them to change their mind.
Mhm.
But again, I am in that position, so that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I get that not everybody can do that.
Right. Or maybe they don't change their mind, and maybe it turns out that the idea that you previously thought was dangerous is actually more reasonable than you thought. Not talking about Nazism, right? But
No,
like,
no, but you're right.
but like, some of these more innocuous examples that get immediately deemed racist, sex, pick your word, right? That aren't, right? That have some more basis in reality, and have some different elements to it that people just aren't considering. And so I think there's growth on both sides that can happen.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting because you mentioned like, we should put ourselves in a room, we should all voice our ideas and then kind of let the ideas fight it out and then see if they win. And
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting because I think I don't know if I disagree with that, but I really was on board with that idea, I would say probably up until I went to the Bridge USA summit.
Okay.
And I've started to realize, well, I've sort of been coming to this idea, not an original thought, but I've been sort of formulating it in my own way with my own
Mm-hmm.
experiences that we're sort of in a time where we have two different histories of this country that we're looking at. We have two different versions of the Constitution. People get their news and their facts from different places. And in their mind, the sources that they're going to are accurate and true.
Right.
So as much as the marketplace of ideas, which I still do believe in, I still think that the more discourse that we have, the more ideas that are put out there, the better. But
Mm-hmm.
in a way, can the best ideas really win?
Well, I think that was
Because
part of the university system, right? Is that was
Mhm.
supposed to be a specific institution for that, where we send all of the presumably smartest and most intelligent and capable people to deliberate these ideas without the influence of things like the media and without the influence of politics and all these things. You just send the smart people together to go debate.
Mhm.
But then it gets corrupted, right? It gets
Yeah.
politicized. It gets, there's financial interests, there's everything else. And so it's a good theory. It's in theory, that is what I hope it to be. But now
Right.
you just see sort of the same thing happening in academia too.
Yeah, I mean, academia has been completely like, I mean, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but like, I mean, it's been gutted, I
Mhm.
think, largely of that original meaning. And
Yeah.
I think that it needs to be that again. But I've just been thinking about that because I think you're right. In theory, the marketplace of ideas thing is great, but I think
Mhm.
as soon as these outside forces start injecting themselves into it,
Mhm.
then I think that it sort of loses its effectiveness
Mhm.
because at the Bridge USA summit, like we were all bridge builders. We were all there for that purpose of bouncing ideas off of each other, learning new perspectives. Um, but and there were people that did change their minds, and there was a lot of very thought-provoking conversations, and I did leave sort of rethinking some of my positions that I wasn't as set in.
Mhm.
But I don't really, yeah, I've just been thinking about that because maybe it's not. Geez, sorry. Maybe it's not as simple as that anymore. Maybe it's not as like, oh, just put them all in the room and the best idea will come out of it. Like, no, like, I mean,
Right.
you come up with the best idea and half the people still might not believe in it. And I don't think
Mhm,
that's necessarily wrong.
mhm.
Um, that's just how people are, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I had two separate quick thoughts. The first is that
Mm.
majority rules doesn't necessarily mean it's the best idea. Like
No.
people are by and large, less intelligent than desirable, and the best idea may not win out just because most people think it. Which again, I think in theory is the good thing of segmenting off this institution and having some segment of the population being the ones to deliberate it. But on the other hand, like you said, I think that even within some of these groups that purport to all believe similarly, I went to, and again, I'll leave out names to avoid, making it seem like I'm trying to shit on this institution. I like the group. But I went to a conference that it was a free speech oriented conference. Everyone there is presumably interested in free speech, anti-censorship, and for free expression and things like that. And one of the things I remember at one of the dinners, we were discussing the ACLU because one of the speakers was like a former ACLU person or had some association with them. I can't really remember, but we were discussing them. And one of the points that I had brought up to the table of us, the table of students that I was sitting at, was that I disagreed with some of the ACLU's positions on pronoun use and how that they seemed more in favor at the time of enforcing or not mandating, but enforcing pronoun use, even if it goes against what someone believes and genuinely wants to say. And to me, that's not free speech. To me, that is still suppressing ideas that you disagree with because you think that they are morally wrong. And regardless of what your stance on transgender issues or pronoun use and all of this stuff, I think that from a purely ideologically pro free speech stance, to me that makes sense to be to believe that shouldn't be enforced, even if you should be encouraged, even if you are in support of it, it should be maybe encouraged, not enforced. The table went silent. Table, like, no one responded to me. It then wound up being that I turned to the person next to me and we had a separate conversation together, and we're discussing that and some other issues, but no one was willing to engage and discuss that because it was an ideologically tinged topic that even the free speech advocates were not willing to advocate for free speech in that part. Like that part was not, it didn't make the cutoff. It was speech that should not be free, even within that free speech group. And I don't want to say, and the reason I'm leaving names out is because that was just a table of college students that were at that conference, right? It's not indicative of the stance of the institution or the group, right? But I think we're getting to that point where people like that are becoming involved with groups that purport to be pro free speech or purport to be pro civil discourse, and these various things that then they do still push their biases or they do still push their ideologies in ways that are more ideologically fascistic than they should be.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the position that I've always had. Like, I'll call anybody whatever they want. Like, that doesn't really, to me, that doesn't really have any weight on me, any burden. If I'm friends with somebody and I respect you as a human being, like, I'll call you whatever you want. I don't really care. But I don't think that should be mandated by, especially the government. I think that would be a very bad idea, because I think if you give them that power, like, oh, it's just pronouns. Yeah, it's just pronouns until they decide to do other stuff with it too. Like, they're not gonna just be like, oh, we'll take this power and we'll just use it for this one little thing. Like, there's gonna be fine print. There's gonna be,
Right.
and before you know it, we're being mandated to, like, say that we love Brandon or whatever, or we love
Right.
Trump, and
or 3 years later you can't say the word thug because it is deemed to have a racial connotation, or something that is not necessarily rooted in reality or whatever.
Or you can't say crazy because it has a negative connotation on people with
Right.
mental illnesses. Like, that
Yeah.
one, when I heard that one, I was like, oh my God, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Seems
Well,
so
and it's
ridiculous.
happening in academia. They're having these lists of words that are unacceptable to use, and even if they're not mandating it, they're at least postulating that there's certain language that shouldn't be used. So
Yeah, and that part I think is a slippery slope.
yeah.
But yeah, so that's a whole thing, and I agree. I mean, I don't think that stuff. Again, out of respect for people, I'll call you whatever you want. Like, that part doesn't really matter to me. But mandating it doesn't seem like a particularly good idea,
Mhm.
because the government doesn't have a track record of doing morally good things.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think they, I think they have a plenty of a track record of abusing power in ways that they shouldn't.
Right.
So that's certainly something. So jumping topics a little bit here,
Mhm.
you told me you've recently been reconnecting with your faith. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up Catholic. We kind of started moving away from it while I was still pretty young. I don't remember how old, but I was probably, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 when I really stopped, started having concerns with it, and we sort of became the Catholics that would go to church on Christmas and Easter, and that
Yep.
was about it. And then
Yeah.
and then eventually that fell off, right? And so then I really disconnected from it. I in large part got into science because I was trying to better understand people and just truth, for lack of a less generic or general term.
Mhm.
And it was sold to me as the logical, objective, rational pursuit of truth.
Yeah.
And I think that in a lot of ways it can be,
Mhm.
at its best. And I think a lot of scientists do that very well. And I'm not, none of what I'm trying to say is at all to disparage science as a whole, because I think it's a necessary institution and does a lot of good. But it's not what it's sold as, right? And so then I went through undergrad, got to grad school, and sort of just started, little things would start bugging me more and more, whether it was different practices going on in different laboratories that I saw as more subjective than they should be, or more biased than they should be, less scientific, quote unquote. But then you sort of learn to price that in and realize that, well, it's still humans, and so fine. I'm still going to, be a part of it and everything. And then COVID hit, and it it was one of it was one of the most eye-opening experiences ever, seeing some of the smartest people I've ever known, all of these, neuroscientists and just geniuses that I was surrounded with, all fall into lockstep with whatever the CDC was saying at the time, or with whatever the current left-leaning narrative was at the time, even after certain elements of it were debunked or found to be not true, whether that was transmission efficacy, prevention of transmission efficacy of the vaccine, or of the efficacy of masks, particularly cloth masks, right? Seeing scientists all over still wearing cloth masks, or wearing their mask down below their nose, right? And just seeing this sort of, for lack of a better term, just, I don't want to quite call it brainwashing, but it just felt like you're supposed to be some of the best critical thinkers in the world. That's what you're supposed to be trained for. And it just felt like people were not thinking critically about COVID and the developments that we were learning, a lot. And so it really, I didn't know who to trust. I definitely didn't trust the media. I definitely didn't trust, big industry players, and definitely didn't trust the government, especially after a lot of stuff came out that either people were lying or people were incorrect, but speaking as though they were absolutely certain that they were correct or whatever. Um, and I don't know. I mean, I don't really know what made me do it. But I picked up the Bible. I figured I didn't know who else to turn to, right? I trusted my family, but I didn't always trust my family's judgment, if that makes sense. Like,
Mhm.
a lot of them had kind of done the same and bought into the sort of the narratives at the time, not just with COVID, but other things. And so I didn't know who to trust or who to believe or where to actually seek truth anymore, because my faith in seeking truth through science and these institutions that did not seem to be appropriately seeking truth in regard to COVID, it sort of all just came crashing down. I don't know. So I started reading the Bible, and it really resonated with me in terms of my values and things, and probably in part because I did grow up Catholic, right? And so I did have that, it, kind of inculcation phase where those values were instilled in me, but also because it was what my family taught me, even aside from the religious members of my family. But it started to resonate with me and it started to make sense. And you start to read stories that you can draw a very close parallel to today. And you can see that these issues have been going on for forever. And this book has survived for that long. And this was what they deemed the appropriate solution. And it started sort of like that. It started sort of as I just need a guidebook for how to live my life, even if it's not about a God, even if it's not about, what I believe in spiritually or metaphysically or whatever. Like I just need someone to tell me what to believe in because I don't believe anything right now.
Mhm.
And so it started with that, and then over time it made enough sense to me that I did start to believe again, and I did start to. I don't want to say again because I think there was probably a part of me that always believed at least a little bit,
Mhm.
but yeah, then I kept writing. I just recently finished the Old Testament and have moved into the New Testament. I'm maybe a third of the way through the New Testament. I had never read it in its entirety growing up. You hear the common stories, David and Goliath, and Jesus and the bread and the fish, and various other stories, but that was kind of the extent of it. So yeah, no, and since then I don't really know what I would call myself. I think when people ask me, I say I'm trying to be Christian. Like I still have various qualms with Catholicism that I can't really get past.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well.
Mhm. But yeah, so I mean that's sort of it, and I mean that's sort of led me to where I am now, and it aligned with my value hierarchy very well. And I value truth and I value family, and I'm now trying to value God more highly too. And that's sort of what the Bible sort of felt like to me. And I just I don't know, it's it is conflicting. The scientist in me and the faith side of me are very much at odds, and it's my over analytical brain it's hard to wrap around faith-based concepts in a lot of cases.
Mhm.
um but that's sort of where I'm at now, and so I still have some of the New Testament to finish, but I think I am, I would say that I do believe in God. I do believe that, Jesus died for our sins and is our savior, right? I believe those things. I'm trying to convince myself that I have full faith, right? Because I think there
Mhm.
is still a part of me that I'm willing to admit is fake it till you make it right now.
Right.
But that's that's sort of where I'm at as the trying to be faithful scientist, I guess.
That's a really interesting thing, yeah, with being such an analytical guy, like you said, and then trying to pick up the Bible. I've wanted to for a very long time. I was
Mhm.
also raised Roman Catholic, and yeah, like you said, I have my qualms with Catholicism and with the Catholic Church that I can't really bring myself to get around. But
Sure.
there's a reason why that book is still around. There's a reason why it's the most read book in history. And I think there is something valuable to taking those ideas and that moral framework and packaging it into a story
Yeah.
as a
And
way to live your life.
yeah. Yeah, the story element is a good part of it because Peterson, if you haven't seen it or if your viewers haven't seen it, I would highly recommend listening to the debates between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. Sam Harris is a neuroscientist too, and
Mm.
he argues from the position that I can't remember if it's reason or rationality. It probably doesn't matter, but
I think his was reason, I
I
think.
think it's reason that can replace religion as the institution, right? And that can, and Peterson's take very quickly is that it can't have the same storytelling ability as religion and can't serve that same role. Um, but I think even beyond, what was I going to say? As far as the storytelling element of it, even besides that, I think the alternative take on what you were just saying is the reason behind it being the most read book in existence, the reason behind it surviving so long, and religion in general. And I've talked with a lot of people that hold this belief, is that religion is just a controlling and manipulative institution, right? That it's
Mhm.
used to keep people in line, so to speak, to have them behave in certain ways, and that over time, whether it's governments or religious leaders of the time or whoever, have selectively changed the texts or things to suit their needs. but it's hard for me to, I mean, it was always a little hard for me to believe that. Like, I believe it to a certain extent, just like anything, any powerful institution is going to have some element of that. But, if you read the Bible, like, it doesn't necessarily, obviously, there are parts that condone following the law and doing things like that, but it's also, a pretty pro, for lack of a better description, there are a lot of elements that are pro freedom, pro individuality, pro, things that would conflict a lot with some sort of controlling entity trying to come in and just completely dominate the population through this manipulative institution.
Yeah, that's true. And I think at some point I will try to pick it up and read it, because I've heard stories of people like it's changed their life, like reading that one book, and I do believe that a book could have the power to do that. I think that's really cool. I think it's really great that you have picked that up again and started reading it. I think that there's a lot of powerful messaging in there, and like I said, I think there's a reason why it's been around for so long.
Yeah. No, I would definitely suggest, even if just from a sort of curiosity perspective, it's tough. Some of those early books, you get into like numbers and things, and they'll be listing the genealogy of these families, like so and so is descended from so and so, and
Oh
from
yeah,
so-and-so,
and
it'll go for
it's like
2 pages.
It's like Lord of the Rings. It's like
Right.
we're getting into like the family lineage of all these people, and yeah, there's a
Right.
lot of names. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get the value of that, right? I'm not
Right.
trying to disparage it, but it's a tough read at times. But if you can get through that kind of drier material, it is, I definitely do think it's worth the read. I have, on my bookshelf, at the time when I got the Bible first, because I didn't own one, I had reached out on like Facebook, like buy nothing groups and give stuff for free type groups. I had asked if anyone had religious texts that I could either borrow or have to start reading. And I got a Bible, and I got, actually a couple of versions of the Bible. Someone gave me a Quran. And so I have these other ones that ultimately I would like to read. I'm a little less, it's lower on the priority list now that I have started getting through the Bible and genuinely do believe in what it's teaching, right? And so it's less like I want to read it less because I'm seeking guidance and truth from those books, and more just to see like what else is out there, what are the perspectives that other people are holding and everything else. Whereas before it was, trying to find that answer. And I can't say for sure, if I had started with the Quran, I don't know, maybe I would believe that too. And because I was kind of lost and trying to just look for something. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely worth it. If you can, even if it's maybe like an ebook or something to kind of get through those boring parts, I would definitely suggest giving it a read.
Yeah, I think I'll have to check it out. I mean, at this point, my list of books that I want to read is actually expanding,
Right.
but I'm not actually knocking anything off. So it's just expanding. It's not even like a controlled thing. It's just like I bought Dostoevsky's collection of books, and then I also have a book from a friend at the University of Pittsburgh that he wrote that I'm trying to get through so he can come on the show again and talk to him about it. At some point I gotta, just because I'm an audiobook guy. I haven't like actually picked up a book and like read through a book in so long. I need to get back into that. But yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
So another thing that you'd brought up to me is that you're trying to start a nonprofit.
Potentially, yeah. I've been talking with a couple other grad students. One is at Case Western, and one is at actually Yale Law School. I've been talking with them about forming a nonprofit focused on research reproducibility. We haven't yet. It's still very much in the planning and just deliberation phase, and trying to see if our interests align well enough that we could, take this on together. But it's sort of in that same vein, right? Of I, and presumably they as well, have just seen these flaws in science's pursuit of truth, and a big part of it is research reproducibility. There has been a larger spotlight recently shown on the e-reproducibility of research. So essentially the inability of researchers to take a paper, take a finding, and then in their own hands reproduce the findings that were in that paper, that were in that study, just to further demonstrate the validity or truthfulness of them. There was a paper, I can't remember when it was, but it was from like industry players who were, trying to take academic papers that were various studies on chemical compounds and drugs and whatnot. And then they would take those and say, hey, this looks promising. Let's try and develop a drug to sell out of this. But obviously we need to verify it first because we don't want to get sued. We don't want to hurt, do whatever.
Yeah.
And so then they try to reproduce it and they can't, more often than not. And so that kind of shone more of a light on it. And so, yeah, I think that it's a problem in science for a lot of different reasons. There's the free speech component of it, in that if you find the quote unquote wrong answer, then a lot of times, well, now your funding's gone, or now you're being ostracized from your parent institution because, they don't agree with what you're finding. But bigger than that, there's just this culture around it that, replication studies aren't sexy. They're not easy to justify funding because we already did the study, we found the result, and now you want to just do it again. It's quote unquote boring. A lot of people just don't want to do that sort of work. And then, even if you do it, negative findings, negative results, the lack of a finding, the lack of something, or something didn't work, it's harder to publish and can even discredit a researcher, unfortunately. So there's a lot that plays into it, and there's a lot of different avenues that we're considering for how we actually want to do this. We'd like to ultimately have some sort of journal that can specifically publish replication studies and can specifically launch initiatives based on research reproducibility, science communication, things like that to help combat it. But yeah, it is a problem in science, and I'm hoping that we can do something with it.
That is actually interesting, and I think that would be cool if you could make that happen, because I would imagine that is, like you said, it's like, we already did the study, why do you want to do it again? Right. That's like a big part of that. And there could be value in running that test again. So yeah. I'm excited to got to keep me updated about what's going on with that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like we said, right? Science is still made up of biased and imperfect humans, and those biased and imperfect humans are doing studies, and then the studies are going to be biased and imperfect to a degree. And so, it is important to, just like any other investigation of anything, or like we were talking about with the marketplace of ideas and determining what's right. Just because one person who happens to be an intellectual and happens to at least seem like they know what they're talking about says that X idea is the right one, well, all right, but are we now going to check with other intellectuals? Or are we going to check, are we going to investigate it from other avenues and see if maybe there was a flaw in your rationale? It's not specific to science, but it's very important in science. But yeah, I'll definitely keep you posted as it hopefully gets formed.
That'll be, yeah, I'm excited to hear about more of that. So what's the update? What's the current status of the Civil Discourse Network?
So it's unfortunately been put on the back burner a little bit, in large part because of school. Right now, I'm still kind of in the phase of reaching out to people. The goal is to form well, let me back up a little bit. I realized that I don't necessarily want to be a podcast host. Right? That's not necessarily where I'm best or what I think I'm most well suited for. But again, sort of in that same vein of seeking truth and seeking, these what's real, what can be trusted, and sort of bring all of these different perspectives together. That's sort of the impetus for it, and that's the hope. Right now, I'm in the stage of just looking very casually to see who to invite to maybe bring onto this network, with the ultimate goal of bringing together not just podcasts, but podcasts, nonprofits, student organizations that are focused on, either specifically focused on civil discourse or focused on one topic area for which civil discourse is super important, right? Whether it's politics, religion, cultural stuff, excuse me, Um, and so I'd like to then have, once those groups and organizations and podcasts are collected, then my hope is to sort of have that platform be the place where those ideas can be discussed, those conversations can happen. Because what I've noticed is that a lot of people do care about civil discourse, but they're sort of off in their own bubble, and there's no hub or central, area where, again, it was supposed to be academia. It was supposed to be academia of this place where people could then come together and discuss together. I don't see any replacement hub, so to speak. And so that's what I'm hoping that it turns into. Again, even if it's just casually, or just winds up being kind of a side project. But yeah, that's the goal. Right now, obviously, we have you guys on board. We unfortunately just had one member stop doing their podcast, because podcasts, they come and go, and they fall off the grid all the time. But I'm in tentative talks with at least one political podcast and one sort of religion-based podcast about bringing them in. And then ultimately I'd like to reach out more specifically to student groups and other nonprofits and stuff that are focused on the same stuff. I've seen a lot of stuff from Fire that I appreciate. Fire has launched this can't remember if it's Learn with Fire or Fire Learn or something to that effect, where they're putting out essentially courses on free speech. And, you can go in both for the professors and teachers and for students. And so similar to the nonprofit, there's a lot of different directions it could go, that I think something like that would be cool to have once that network is formed, have some sort of joint meeting or something to determine how a course on civil discourse would look, and how to maybe incorporate it with the network. But yeah, as of right now, it's still very much in the fledgling stage, and until I finish grad school, unfortunately, it'll probably stay there. But I'm excited about it. I think that even if it is only really able to help bridge build and encourage civil discourse in my and the respective members' immediate bubbles, I still think that it can be a force for good, and the force for finding a better approximation of the truth.
Yeah. So for those who are not aware, FIRE is the Freedom for Individual Rights and Expression organization.
Foundation for Individual Rights.
Foundation for Individual Rights and Organization. Yeah. Oops.
Yeah. They used to be the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, and they were much more specifically focused on college campuses and things like that. And they've just fairly recently expanded out to focus on kind of non-university based initiatives and stuff like that.
Yes. And I'm excited to be a part of it, at least. And I have you ever, like, I know you'd mentioned that you'd reach out to the Conversationalist, and they had said that was a potential partnership they would look into in the future.
Yeah, they had said that at the time they had too much on their plate to deal with it. They're relatively speaking new enough that I can understand that they have still, their own kind of foundation to set and framework to set. It's also become more clear that over time that if you are not already a player in the civil discourse or bridge building space, it's hard to recruit people from that space, because who the hell are you, and why do I want to go join you and do this when I'm already doing perfectly well on my own? And I think that plays into kind of that segregation of these groups, to where everyone is in their own bubble, because they're in part because they are focused on their own foundation and their own frameworks and things, which is important. But also then if some random, scientist like me comes along and is like, hey, I want to form a group of all of these civil discourse focused entities, but I myself am not really established in the civil discourse space, it's harder to form those connections at that stage. So I'm hoping that kind of, as once I graduate, my main plans are to go into policy writing and potentially that research reproducibility nonprofit if it winds up taking off. And I think both of those things, while they're not necessarily in the civil discourse space, I think they can at least legitimize and demonstrate my hope to pursue truth and hope to create institutions or help fix institutions that purport to seek truth, which I think is at least civil discourse adjacent enough to maybe earn some trust. But yeah, I think that, with starting with some of the smaller podcasts or student organizations and things, and even just building up the other elements of it on the website. So for anyone who's interested, you can go to saywhatneedsaying.com. We've got, a bunch of resources on there where we'll just list various other groups that are focused on free speech or focused on civil discourse, things like that. And even some sort of repository or database of sorts of those sorts of things, I think right now is largely absent. And I think building up things like that, again, probably more so post-graduation when I have some more time to dump into it, we'll sort of establish some credibility and incentivize people to jump in and join. And once we've gotten some members and have had some fruitful conversations, that'll always help too, of course.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I don't know if, ever considering reaching out to Bridge USA. I'm not sure really if they would be interested in something like that, but it seems like, I mean, you're trying to get into the space, and I do agree. It's sort of that thing where, like, who are you? This
Right.
college student, that hasn't really been established, and trying to get these people to work with you. Yeah, that is something that we've sort of run into similar problems with, but it's getting better. I think we all need to build each other up. I think
Right.
if we sort of take Rogan's approach to comedy to this, he proved that if you bring everybody up with you, everybody benefits from that. Like, he didn't lose a single view by platforming all these other comedians and getting them more people at their shows and getting their podcast more views.
Right.
I think we have to do the same thing. We all got to work
Yeah.
together as much as we can.
Another good example is Mr. Beast. I don't know if you've seen any of his interviews where he discusses the early, beginnings of his YouTube channel. And he'll discuss how, like, look, there's one thing to start on your own, and, like, let's say every week you make one screw up. Then yes, you learn from it, you grow, you better, great. But if you work with 4 other people, one of you makes a mistake on Friday and he teaches the other 4 people, then someone else makes a mistake on Tuesday and then they teach the other 4 people, right? And you've exponentially increased your rate of growth and learning to where now you can create this better, in his case, YouTube channel, right? Or in our cases, a better platform for civil discourse, or a better, more conducive conversation, whether it's the style itself or the platform on which it's happening, and I think that, again, you sort of see, I sort of see a lack of that in this space, in that, everyone is kind of working on their own. They may have their team, and they're, working to build up their own institution or their podcast or their nonprofit or whatever. It's also hard, it's hard to, because at a certain point you begin collaborating with competitors, if that makes sense. Like, it's once you are established, especially, then I understand the sentiment that people hold that, well, I could potentially lose viewers, or I could potentially, if I help this fledgling, group get off the ground, and suddenly now they're taking viewers. I don't think it's no effect. Like, I'm sure that there are certain instances where that can happen. But more, like you said, with Rogan or with Mr. Beast or whoever else, I think the potential for growth and the potential for learning and better addressing the commonly held issue outweighs any potential for lack of growth, or any potential for lost viewers or listeners or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree. Like, people are gonna have that mindset of, like, oh, should I help? But that's it's such a crazy mind. Like, I actually don't understand it. It's like, we all have the same goal. Everybody wants the same thing. So even if you do lose some viewers, well, they're still going over to this other person. Like, yeah, you might lose some revenue and that kind of thing, but, like, we all need that. And I don't even think that is really a problem that we would run into. The more people we have doing this, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, in general, I agree. I think the problems that you run into are at the point of, like, say, the Daily Wire Crowder fiasco, right? Of where you run into a fundamental disagreement over how to handle something.
Mm.
And then if you're in a partnership with that person where you now necessarily have to work together on some level, and it comes up that you have fundamental disagreements about how civility should be pursued, or how, the conversation style that best accommodates civil discourse, or I'm trying to pull examples related to this kind of out of my ass, but I think if you run into that genuine fundamental disagreement, whether it's your values, your principles, or even just what business model you want to adopt, then I understand that it could become a little harder to partner with, or collaborate with those people, at least to a large degree, right? You could just collaborate a little less, or to a smaller degree, or maybe not work on a shared initiative like the Civil Discourse Network we're talking about, but have people on for an interview, or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
So at that level, I could see there being problems, but at the onset, especially talking about something as broad as civil discourse, I see it as a little less likely to really run into those issues.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to be part of it. I think over time, if it gets bigger, you definitely be able to pull in some more people.
Yeah, here's hoping.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what the future of that looks like. What advice do you have for young people?
What advice do I have for young people? I would say really think about what your value hierarchy is. And what I mean by that is think about what you value, where it is on that hierarchy relative to other things, and then how you can pursue it. So I was having a conversation with a family member who was at the time, I think they were either just going into college, or somewhere in the middle. And we were talking about this, and I had mentioned that she had insinuated that she wanted to value family more highly, and that she was getting caught up with all of these things that she was doing in school, and was missing some family events and whatnot, and felt bad about it. And I told her that I've had similar experiences, right? Being in grad school and being in a different state from my family and whatnot. And it's important, I think, to reflect on that value hierarchy and say, okay, yes, I value family highly. Is there anything that I value more highly than family? And if so, why? And if not, then how best can I approach that value without going against it, right? And so maybe you miss a family event because you're at a college, you're in class, or you have a club, or a job, or whatever. I don't think it's necessarily the best way to value family to just go home to family, go to every single family event, and go to be with them every minute of every day, because then long term you're not setting yourself up to either have a family, or to be able to provide for a family, or to be able to really be in a position where you can comfortably go and visit or see family and whatnot. And so it's not quite as simple as I value family, so therefore I will go see family more. You kind of have to think a little more long term sometimes, and figure that out. So yeah, figure out what your value hierarchy is. It's not easy. It takes some deep reflection that I didn't do for a long, probably until COVID, to be honest. But reflect on your value hierarchy, figure out what it is, and then pursue it. But then outside of that, even if you don't value it as highly as I do, pursue truth. Don't. I know it's hard to always say what you think, or to hold fast to your beliefs and be principled. I'm not trying to say that I always do, because I'm still working on it too. But that's what the biggest issue I think in today's world is: a lack of principled individuals who truly abide by what they think is true. So yeah, try your best to do that.
And looking into what gives you hope for the future?
What gives me hope for the future, I think, I mean, it's tough in today's day and age, dude. Everything
Yeah,
seems bad.
yeah, it
Um,
is.
honestly, going, and maybe this conflicts a little bit with what I was just saying, going home and seeing my niece and nephew.
Mhm.
They're, you know, just seeing their childhood purity or ignorance, you know, how whatever you want to call it, and just seeing the way that they see the world and the happiness and joy that I can see on my niece's face when the simplest little thing will happen, right? And
Yeah,
she'll crack up and she'll love it. And it's something that, you know, you see is just lost in the real world, right? Once you hit a certain age, you're just jaded and just,
mm,
you know, you're so closed off to some of the good in your life that things get framed much more pessimistically or much more dreadful and doomsday like than they probably are. Again, I'm guilty of that all the time. I'm
mhm,
almost always more pessimistic than I should be. But yeah, I think seeing that and seeing how they handle things, but also the possibility of having kids myself. I do really want to have kids one day. I think that it's one of my number one priorities to, after graduation, move back towards Ohio, find something in these various spheres that we've talked about for a career or job, and quote unquote settle down and, you know, and have a family and be able to instill my values, what I believe to be the right values, because I mean, obviously I hold them,
mhm.
but instill those values in them and to kind of pass down that these feelings to them in the sense that hopefully they grow up being a little less jaded than I am,
Mm.
and hopefully not conferring as much of my pessimism. And you know, just the potential for other people to do the same, I think, still gives us hope. I know that's cliche to say, you know, the children are our future, but
I think that's.
ultimately, you know, yeah.
I think it's part of the childlike wonder. Like everything is new, everything is exciting for them. They're just trying to figure out this world, and yeah, I mean, I think it is easy. Recently, it's been really easy to just feel like it's all going downhill. But I wonder if this is how people have always felt.
Right.
Like when you look back through the 20th century, it seems like at every turn there was something wrong.
Hmm.
Something was going on that felt like, well, it's over after this.
Hmm.
You know, two world wars, two pandemics,
Hmm. I wonder how
smaller
much though,
wars.
you know, whether it's media or social media or whatever, like everyone's more aware of it now. You know, it may have always
Yeah,
been the case, but I think it was a lot easier for people to just kind of, you know, settle down in your much cheaper house with your white picket fence, with your with your
yeah.
wife and two kids and your dog, barbecuing on a Sunday. And I know, look, you know, obviously I have a very specific upbringing that I can't empathize as well with people who are in more impoverished situations in inner cities or whatnot. That
Mm,
yes, even back then, before the advent of social media and before widespread media usage, yeah, it was still hard as shit for a lot of people.
yeah.
You know, but I can empathize to a degree, like, you know, so my, not to tangent too hard, but my great grandma was, during World War II, she was put in a Nazi work camp in Austria. And
Mm,
then she wound up, you know, a number of different stories about her having to, you know, hide my grandpa in a hole in the ground so that he wasn't discovered and killed, and, you know, all these things. And then they moved here. And then I have some stories of my grandpa's struggles growing up, and then my dad's still greater than mine, but less than my grandpa's struggles. And same thing on my mom's side and everything. And so I could see that progression. And I think that gives me hope that no matter what situation you're in, even if it is something that I personally can't empathize with as well, that, you know, again, kind of going to that hope for the future, that it is still possible to, you know, get out of that and provide better for your children, to provide better for the future. But I don't know. I wonder how much of it, like, I think certain people may have always felt that way, but I think a lot of people lived sort of in blissful ignorance of all the bad going on in the world too, for better or worse.
yeah, I agree. I think there's that idea that, every generation hopefully has a little bit of an easier time getting,
Mm-hmm.
to a better position that you were in. Yeah. Well, I think we got to wrap up here. Thank you for giving us time today, despite your crazy travel schedule and going to, between work and everything. I appreciate it.
This was
We'll
fun.
chat soon.
All right. Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. Like I said, if anyone wants to check out the Civil Discourse Network, definitely do. Even if it is still in its fledgling status, you can find it on saywhatneedsaying.com. I won't even plug socials because it hasn't been active in months at this point. But yeah, I really appreciated coming on. This was a great conversation. I'm glad we could talk about politics, but not just politics.
Yeah, yes, not just. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Bye, everybody.
All right. Take care.